Hello everyone, this is Philosophy 72, Modern Philosophy. This is week 9, and we are doing Kierkegaard and existentialism. You see that in the syllabus. Remember, and this is also the beginning of part 3 and the final part of the semester. We are doing Kierkegaard, then next time Sartre, and then Heidegger, these three philosophers. And remember that the theme of the class is right from the outset, right? The self, the other, the world, right? So we saw the self being established by Descartes. Remember, I think, therefore I am. I think the thinking thing for Descartes, the subject, the self, and then that was already, being deconstructed by. We saw that with Spinoza, the idea of the critique of the independent individual as the kingdom within a kingdom, and then with Nietzsche as well, right? We saw that also the critique of the sovereign individual, master of a free will, and so on. We find also the same with Kierkegaard and existentialism. Okay, so I mean, let me also say that Kierkegaard comes in the 19th century, like Nietzsche, but actually, Kierkegaard lives in the first half of the 19th century. He dies young, Nietzsche too. And Nietzsche, however, lives in the second half of the 19th century, although we did Nietzsche before um, Kierkegaard, and the words that I put in the syllabus are precisely right. Introduction to Kierkegaard and existentialism. I will speak about that in a moment. Anxiety and despair, two important concepts in the philosophy of Kierkegaard, of existentialism. In general, we are reading this book, The Sickness Unto Death, by Kierkegaard, selections from it, passages, and then I highlighted some passages for you, and also the words finitude slash infinitude, possibility slash necessity. I'll be speaking about that particularly today. So, but what you see precisely, what is existentialism? First of all, I hate to be sketchy, simple. I hope not too simplistic, but in the tradition of philosophy, uh, there is this idea that essence comes before existence, right? Essence is what something is. What is it? The whatness of something. Existence is that something is. The fact that something is thatness, existence, whatness, essence. The idea is generally that essence comes before existence, but with existentialism, and actually Kierkegaard and Nietzsche too, they are considered to be forerunners of the movement of existentialism in philosophy that comes later, actually, because the movement begins in the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century. One of the most important people in that movement is Sartre, but the existentialists in the 20th century, they went back to Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and other people as well. I will say more maybe about this next time, but in any case, that's basically the idea that existence, especially in when we speak about human life, because if we speak about any object, this book, we know what the book is, what we want to the book to be even before we make it, right? But in relation to human life, the idea is that the focus is on becoming, right? It's a constant process of becoming what we are. I mean, it's not the case that I'm already something to begin with, that I have an essence, an identity, and so on and so forth, right? A nature. No, I become what I am by doing things and so on and so forth. Okay, so existence comes before essence. Essence, what I am, if anything, it can be determined only at the end, say, of my life, I mean, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what a person is comes after the fact that this person does things, right? The actions are going to be very important, and in action there is of course especially think about when we make important choices, right? There must be this degree of anxiety, right? I mean, the anxiety that comes with not knowing what we are going to be doing in the future. The future is, indeterminate, uncertain, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in any case, we'll speak more about this even next time with Sartre. And but remember this. So existence. What is it to exist? Right? I mean, it is precisely not to be, but to come to be, coming to be, becoming. Right? To exist is. I don't want to go into that too deep, but it is. You have to remember this, bear this in mind. The etymology of to exist, existence is precisely to stand out. Okay, so it is the standing out. You can think about existence. You can, look that up in a dictionary. Google it. Etymology of existence. To exist is to stand out. Okay, it is this standing out that makes us what we are, that makes us also do things and so on. And if you think of it in standing out, there is a danger as well, right? I mean, because the opposite of, and this is important in Kierkegaard as well, of the opposite of standing out and ultimately be what you can be, become what you can become. The opposite of that is to instead become a number in the crowd, right? Where everybody is the same, right? So to stand out is, let's put it this way, also to be, but to be is to become yourself. But this self, and that's the problematic aspect that you see at the outset of this book. The self is a synthesis. Synthesis means the coming together of at least two different elements. Okay, a synthesis, a unity, but synthesis. It is this, especially, and you will find this in the book, a synthesis between the finite and the infinite, or finitude, infinitude. The finite between possibility and necessity. They are both together in the human condition. There is no human nature, it is the human condition, but it is this synthetic movement that we are going to see in a moment as well. And a synthesis is a relation, right? I mean, when you have a relation, you must have always at least two items, two elements to make the relation. Okay, so and that's what the self is, right? And you will find in the kind of convoluted initial moment. I don't want to go into that. Don't be, don't worry about that if you don't understand on page 9, right? The beginning of, the description of the self as this relation that relates, to itself in the relation, but it is a synthesis, okay? So what I want you to think about is that the self is no longer the simple whatever entity that we saw in Descartes, the thinking thing, right? The soul, mind, okay, the I think, but it is split within itself. It is divided already, okay, to begin with. Okay, so it can be also more than two, but certainly for Kierkegaard, it is the coming together, the synthesis of these two moments. Okay, finite, infinite, possible, necessary, and so on and so forth. There are, I want to call attention. I don't want to be too long. And then you pay attention also to the highlighted sections when he speaks about despair. But I want to go directly to page 14, I believe, right, where he speaks of the idea of his despair is the sickness unto death, and then I move, read again those highlighted sections, very interesting. He gives some examples, right? Examples where you see the meaning of despair and also anxiety, right? Wanting to be, when we want to be something, there is also always a degree of anxiety. So then the form of this sickness on page 28, okay? So I focus on this one section. Now, the forms of this sickness, that is to say, of despair. That's what the title says. Again, this is the top of page 28. And you see that I highlighted that section here. Kierkegaard says the self is composed of infinity and finiteness, finitude. Okay, think about that. Finite means that there are limits around something, and we are always in a situation of finitude, right here and now. There are limits, right? And then this infinity. Now, I want to introduce this concept that you will find here, and it's very important. I ask you to write about that in the journal. But this infinitizing moment, right? When I change the situation in which I find myself, because I always find myself within a situation, again, time and space, here and now, and so on. When I change that situation, when I do something new, then I basically step into something which is beyond the situation, the limits of the situation in which I am. This beyond, right? Stepping into something new, the unknown, and so that's why also anxiety. But this is an exit from the finite, and so it is the opposite of the finite, and the opposite of the finite is the not finite, the infinite. Okay, so I infinitize myself. There is this infinitizing moment, but that doesn't mean that I infinitize myself, period, forever. I then end up in another finite situation, right? So there is this process of right, there is this infinitizing process movement and the finitizing movement as well. So that's what I hope that you understand. This it's like the idea is to exit from a situation, to go beyond, say, the limits, the framing of the box, right? And then to find oneself in a new situation, which is finite as well, which also has limits, but again, this process can continue, right? And again, this is the process of becoming oneself and so on. Like I said, otherwise, the opposite of that would be to be a number in the crowd, okay? So he says the self is composed of a infinitude, but the synthesis is, I mentioned that before, a relationship, and it is a relationship which, though it is derived, relates itself to itself, and that is freedom, which means freedom. Okay, that's what then we'll speak more about this problematic understanding of freedom with Sartre. Is not the freedom of the free will, I do as I please, but it is precisely the freedom that comes with the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen and so on. The self is freedom, right? Precisely because it is not made once and for all. There is no essential moment that precedes what I do and so on, but I make myself as I do things. Freedom in this sense, okay? We will speak more about freedom next time, but freedom is the dialectical element in terms of possibility and necessity. I'll speak more about this, but the dialectical movement is precisely what goes from one situation, negates that situation into another, right? If I become, when I finish college and I graduate, I am no longer a student. I was a student before, now I graduated, right? So it is a new situation in which I find myself, but I do that by moving things about, by doing something, by standing out and moving away from the situation in which I was originally. Okay, so that's basically what you find, and at the bottom of page 28. You have I will focus on two of these movements, dialectical movements, right, that are very important. One is that's the last line of on page 28, despair viewed under the aspects of finitude and infinitude. And this is very beautiful. Again, I call attention to some moments only, but he says the self is, that's the top of page then 29, the self is the conscious synthesis of infinitude and finitude, which relates itself to itself, whose task is to become itself. Okay, so the task of the self, that's like a kind of paradox, right? I mean, the self has to become itself. That's the task that I have, right, to become myself. Okay, I am, the self is not constituted to begin with. To begin with, what you have is only this relation and this possibility of the movement of going from one situation into another. I hope that this is clear. I mean, at the beginning of our life, right, we are in the situation in which we are, which is not of our choosing, right? I mean, we don't choose the place where we were born, the family, the language, the religion, and so on and so forth, right? But then after we find ourselves there, little by little, we can start, confirming some things. For example, I can keep speaking the same language, that I learned to begin with, or I can learn another language, right? I mean, and stop speaking the original first so-called native language, and then speak another one, and so on. I can move away from the community, the town in which I was born, and so on and so forth. Okay, I can start making myself, becoming myself, and that's the task of the self, to become something, to become itself. Okay, but to become, he continues, oneself is to become concrete. I mean, so it's not that I hope the word concrete is clear. It's not that I become, it's not a question of free will, I do as I please. No, I don't do as I please, because I always do things starting from the situation in which I find myself. That's the meaning of freedom in the existentialist sense. Okay, but to become concrete means neither to become finite nor infinite. Okay, I mean, it is not good enough, right, to only become finite only, or infinite, to lose myself in a world, of fantasy, imagination, right? But it is always this movement, this dialectical movement, this relation between the two. Okay, so neither to become finite nor infinite, for that which is to become concrete is a synthesis, right? It is always the togetherness, the coming together of both. Okay, not just one. Accordingly, the development consists in, I'm reading again, in moving away, that's really beautiful, and then maybe I wrap up there, but then you continue reading, but this is really key. The development consists in moving away from oneself infinitely. I move away from myself, the situation in which I am, by the process of, I'm reading, infinitizing oneself. I spoke about that already. And in returning to oneself infinitely by the process of finitizing, right? I mean, think about, going away, taking, a trip somewhere. You go away, you move away, but then also you come back. There is a return. I mean, and actually, if there is no return, then it would be a real problem, right? No possibility of returning to the ground, the grounding, and so on, in a different way, of course, because experience also, if it's true experience, is going to change us. Okay, if on the contrary, I read again, the self does not become itself, that's a problem too. So I mean, I lose myself, right? So then it is in despair, right? That's despair, and there are various ways in which the self can experience this despair. Then you will I'll just point this out, whether he knows it or not. Some people may not be aware of their situation of despair, and that's even worse, because at least to be aware, that's better already. However, a self, every instant it exists, is in the process of becoming. Remember, coming to be. For the self potentially does not actually exist. It is only that which it is to become. Okay, I said that before. It's not that I am something to begin with, but I am what then I become, right? I become what I am. And I continue reading. Insofar as the self does not become itself, that's a big problem, right? It is not its own self, but not to be one's own self is despair. And then you have at least I call attention to these two movements. One is the despair of infinitude, is to lack finitude. Read that. Beautiful moments you will find highlighted especially. I mean, if I lack finitude, I lack the grounding. I lose myself in a world of, for example, fantasy, imagination, so I had to have both. And then I just highlight the beginning of these wonderful sections on the top of page 30, the bottom of page 32. You had the opposite problem, if you will, and the opposite movement. The despair of finitude is to lack infinitude, right? I mean, if I am completely caught up in a situation, in a kind of a cage, right? If I'm framed and I cannot find a way out, then I only experience finitude, but not infinitude. I cannot infinitize myself. That is another moment of despair. Okay, so to lack finitude or to lack infinitude, either way, then that is the experience of despair. What you then need, right? The dialectical movement is that of the synthesis of having both the the infinitizing moment, and then the finitizing moment, and then another infinitizing moment, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you have the same with possibility and necessity. You have this at the bottom page 35, despair viewed under the aspects of possibility and necessity. On the top of page 36, a self which has, I'm reading, no possibility is in despair, and so also in turn is the self which has no necessity. Again, we need both possibility, freedom of changing. Again, it's like infinitude, basically, and necessity, right? Kind of grounding, again, finitude. Okay, so that's basically what you find here, and it is very similar to what we saw before. So the despair, that's page 36. The despair of a possibility is due to the lack of necessity, right? Lacking necessity is not good. And then, then everything becomes possible, which is, really a problem, right? Because it is not the case that everything is possible, right? I mean, think about that. I mean, it depends on what we have done before in our life. I mean, I can do some things, I cannot do others, and so on and so forth. And then at the end of page 38, you find the opposite movement, right? The despair of a necessity is due to the lack of a possibility. Just like before, with finitude and infinitude, here too, to lack necessity is, let's say, a problem, situation of despair. To lack possibility, same idea. Okay, and then you find other important moments, again highlighted, but I wrap this up here. And you will find also the moment when he says precisely, that if one does not become oneself, what one can become, then there is this danger of, and that's in the section on possibility and necessity of becoming simply a number, right, in the crowd, right? So to lose oneself in whatever is the same, one of the same. Okay. So I hope that this is clear. Next time we'll continue with existentialism, doing Sartre. Again, ask questions if you have any. Okay. See you next time. Thank you. Bye.